The summer heat in Charlotte, North Carolina had that particular kind of stubbornness to it, the kind that pressed down on your shoulders like a hand that refused to let go. Savannah Merritt wiped the back of her neck with a dish towel and carried a bowl of her mother's potato salad through the sliding glass door onto the back patio, where her father, Jim Merritt, was already holding court. He stood at the grill like a general commanding troops, tongs in one hand, a sweating bottle of Sweetwater IPA in the other, wearing that faded University of Georgia apron Savannah had bought him 12 Christmases ago. Around him, 4 men in polo shirts laughed at something she hadn't caught. Golf stories, probably. They were always golf stories. "Savannah, put that on the table and grab some ice from the garage," her father said without turning around. She did. That was their rhythm. Had been for years. Savannah was 34 years old. She had built a cybersecurity consulting firm from a folding table in her Atlanta apartment, had been featured in Forbes and Fast Company, had spoken at RSA conference in front of 4,000 people. None of that had ever quite made it across the dinner table to Jim Merritt, who measured success in country club memberships and how far a man could drive a Titleist. She set the potato salad down next to the baked beans and straightened the plastic fork beside a paper plate. Her mother, Diane, caught her eye from across the patio and gave her that familiar apologetic smile, the one that said, "You know how he is, and I love you both," in the same tired breath. Before the guests arrived, her father had pulled her aside near the kitchen doorway. He'd said it casually, almost like a reminder not to leave the screen door open. "My golf buddies don't need to hear about whatever it is you do." Whatever it is you do. She had nodded, smiled, carried the potato salad outside. Savannah found a seat at the far end of the long folding table her mother had dressed up with a checkered tablecloth and mason jar centerpieces. She poured herself a lemonade, put her sunglasses on, and decided she would get through this afternoon the same way she got through most things involving her father, quietly, efficiently, and without expecting anything in return. The guests trickled in. Neighbors, church friends, a few men from Jim's Thursday morning golf league at Piper Glen. They shook hands, slapped backs, talked about handicaps and the new green superintendent who was supposedly ruining the back nine. One man arrived a little late. He was tall, maybe 60, with silver hair and the kind of easy, unhurried walk that came from a lifetime of knowing where you stood in any room. He wore a pale blue Oxford shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows and carried a bottle of Woodford Reserve as a host gift. Her father lit up when he saw him. "Brooks, get over here!" Brooks Calloway. Savannah recognized the name the way you recognize a street you've driven down once in a different city. Something faint clicked in the back of her memory, but she couldn't place it. She turned back to her lemonade. The afternoon moved the way those afternoons do, slow and warm, full of laughter she was adjacent to but not inside of. She watched a hummingbird fight with a lantana bush near the fence. She refilled her glass. She answered her mother's questions about whether she was eating enough and if she was seeing anyone. She was doing just fine being invisible. She was good at it by now. It was somewhere between the second round of burgers and the peach cobbler that Brooks Calloway picked up his plate and moved. There were plenty of open seats. The table was long enough, but he came directly to her end, not in the hovering, uncertain way of someone looking for a place to land, but with the quiet, deliberate purpose of a man who had spotted exactly where he wanted to be. He set his plate down beside hers, pulled out the chair, and sat. "You're Savannah," he said, not a question. She took off her sunglasses. "I am." "Brooks Calloway." He extended his hand and she shook it, firm, confident, the handshake of someone who had been in a lot of rooms that mattered. "I know the name," she said carefully. He smiled, like he'd expected her to say that. "I've been trying to figure out how to do this for about 2 years now." He glanced down the table toward her father, who was mid-story about a triple bogey he was somehow making sound heroic. "I didn't know Jim's daughter was you until about 45 minutes ago. Your mother mentioned what you do, and I almost dropped my burger. Savannah tilted her head. What did she say I do? Cybersecurity, firm based in Atlanta. He looked at her steadily. Merit Consulting. There it was, the click. Callaway Industries, she said. That's right. She remembered it clearly now. 3 years ago, a mid-sized manufacturing company based out of Greensboro had come to her firm in crisis mode, a ransomware attack that had encrypted 70% of their operational systems 4 days before a major government contract deadline. The kind of situation that ends companies. Their internal IT team had been completely overwhelmed. Someone had found her firm through a referral and called at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. Savannah had answered, because she always answered. She and her team had worked for 61 hours without meaningful sleep. Forensic analysis, containment, system recovery, documentation for the federal client. They'd made the deadline with 18 hours to spare. The company had kept its contract, kept its doors open. She had sent her invoice, received payment, and moved on to the next crisis. That was the work. You didn't always know what happened on the other side of it. That was your company, she said. That was my company. His voice had gone quieter. He glanced down at the table for a moment. 412 employees. I had already started drafting the letter. The one you write when you're about to tell people they don't have jobs anymore. He paused. Your team stopped that. Savannah didn't say anything. She'd learned a long time ago how to sit inside a moment without filling it up with words. I've thought many times about how to thank the people who saved what I built, Brooks continued. Sent a note to the firm, tried to find a personal contact. He shook his head slightly. And here you are, at Jim Merritt's backyard barbecue. He turned toward her father then, raised his voice just enough to carry clearly over the table. Jim! Her father looked over, mid-sentence. Do you realize your daughter is the reason I still have my company? I've been wanting to thank her family for 2 years. The table went quiet, the way tables do when something real interrupts the casual noise of an ordinary afternoon. Every face turned. Her father's expression moved through several different rooms. Confusion, recalibration, something that looked briefly like embarrassment, and then landed somewhere slower and harder to name. Savannah sat very still. Her lemonade was sweating a ring into the checkered tablecloth. She didn't look at her father. She looked at Brooks Callaway, who was looking at her with the uncomplicated gratitude of a man who had been waiting a long time to say something true. The cobbler came out. Conversations resumed. The hummingbird returned to the lantana. But something had shifted in the air, the way pressure shifts before a storm. Not dramatic, not loud, just fundamentally different from what it had been an hour before. Her father came to her end of the table when Brooks had moved on to talk with another guest. Jim Merritt pulled out the chair his friend had just vacated and sat down in it. He put his forearms on the table, held his beer bottle in both hands, and looked at the backyard for a long moment before he looked at her. I didn't know, he said finally. I know you didn't. I mean, I knew you did well. Your mother tells me. He cleared his throat. I just didn't understand what that meant. Savannah had prepared, at various points in her life, a version of this conversation. She had rehearsed versions that were sharp, and some that were careful, and some that dissolved before they reached her throat. Sitting here now, in the actual moment, what she felt was not the anger she'd expected. It was something more like tiredness and tenderness pressed against each other, the way you feel at the end of a very long project when it finally resolves. You asked me to be quiet today, she said. She said it without accusation, just as a fact placed on the table between them. He winced. It was small, but she saw it. Yeah, I did. I've been quiet for a long time, Dad. He didn't argue with that. She respected him for it. They sat together in the heat, two people who loved each other in the imprecise, effortful way of parents and children who are too similar in some ways and too far apart in others. The gap between them wasn't malice. It had never been malice. It was the gap that forms when someone cannot see you clearly, and you have stopped trying to make them look. "Tell me about it," her father said. "What you actually do." So she did. She told him about the Tuesday night call, about the 61 hours, about the 412 employees who had kept their jobs and never known how close it came. She told him about the firm she'd built and what it meant to be the person on the other end of the line when everything is on fire. She told him about the work, not the resume version, not the conference version, the real version, the version that lived in her bones. He listened, actually listened, in the way he used to when she was small and would tell him about things she'd found in the backyard, pill bugs, unusual rocks, a bird feather she was convinced was significant. He used to have that face then. She had missed that face. "You should have told me," he said when she finished. "You should have asked," she answered, gently, honestly. He nodded once. It was a slow nod, the kind that means a person is moving something heavy from one place to another inside themselves. Diane appeared behind them and set 2 fresh slices of cobbler down without a word, touched Savannah's shoulder as she passed, and walked back toward the kitchen. She had always known when to be quiet and when to stay. Later, when the guests had gone and the folding table was broken down and the yard smelled like citronella and wood smoke, Savannah stood at the kitchen sink rinsing dishes. Her father came and stood beside her, picked up a dish towel, and dried what she washed. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. It wasn't a revolution. It wasn't a grand reconciliation wrapped up in a perfect ending. It was smaller and more honest than that. 2 people, a sink full of dishes, and a door left a little more open than it had been that morning. That, Savannah thought, was enough to start with. The most invisible person in the room is often the one holding everything together. Value people for who they are before the world tells you who they've become, because by then, you may have already missed years of knowing them.